Delighted that we are hosting Professor Hariz Halilovich this evening. But first of all, let me just say that the Harriman Institute at Columbia University is one of the world's leading academic institutions for the study of Russia, Eurasia, and East Central Europe. Our mission is to serve our community at the university and beyond by supporting research, instruction, and dialogue, sponsoring vibrant and multidisciplinary events that bring together our extraordinary resources of faculty, students, and alumni. And we are committed to training the next generation of regional specialists to play leadership roles in setting the academic and scholarly agenda, making policy and challenging accepted truths about how we study our rapidly changing world. We are also a training ground and an intellectual home for many prominent scholars and specialists on the Balkans. The Harriman Institute fulfills its mission of training academic experts on the region and providing a public forum like this evening to discuss important issues relating to the Balkans through our courses, lectures, and conferences. Our guest tonight, our guest speaker is Hariz Halilovich, who's an award-winning social anthropologist. And I am really happy that we have an anthropologist in our midst. I have a bias. I will openly articulate my bias that I think political science is oversubscribed in the region. And I think it actually kind of warps our understanding when we aren't talking to people, real people like anthropologists do and sociologists. We really don't know as much about the people. And so I'm becoming a very strong advocate for sociology and anthropology. And my colleague here, Amra Sabic, is over at Teachers College doing her thing on getting into it through education. All these different disciplines, we need a lot more of them looking on and researching the Balkans. And so I just want to say that he is a professor of global studies and the Australian Council Future Fellow at the Social and Global Studies Center at, is it RMIT?
RMIT.
RMIT.
R is for Royal.
Got it, Royal. Don't tell that to Mr. Charles, the king to be soon knighted. Anyway, his research is focused on place-based identity politics, politically motivated violence, forced migration, memory studies, and human rights. All these topics are very near and dear to my heart. And his publications include the books, Places of Pain, Forced Displacement, Popular Memory, and Translocal Identities in the Bosnian War, Torn Communities, Writing After Srebrenica, and Monsters of Modernity, Global Icons for Our Critical Condition, co-authored with Julian Lee. In addition to academic writing, he's also produced a number of multimedia exhibitions, works of fiction, and radio and TV programs. I just want to really thank you for reaching out to me, Hariz. I am delighted that we could host you. A while ago, you and I talked about us doing something together. I'm so happy we're here together tonight.
Thank you very much.
So you now have the floor.
Yes. Thank you very much for this warm introduction. And yes, bumped into each other in Srebrenica.
Srebrenica, yes.
And before that, we had many online interactions. And Harriman Institute has truly been a kind of hub for disseminating work on Bosnia and the Balkans. And I'm very pleased to be here after many of my colleagues have already been here either physically or virtually. And I thank you, Tanya, especially in the Harriman Institute for supporting our research, enabling us to share our research findings and ideas and to bring people here. Thank you to my distinguished audience tonight for making it this hour. I know you all live busy lives.
Yes, we should thank Professor Pettigrew for coming down from Southern Connecticut University.
And my dear friend and colleague David Pettigrew has come from New Haven to do this. And David and I also go a long way from Bosnia to St. Louis to different places with different activities. As Tanya introduced, I'm an anthropologist, and anthropologists do directly with people and with people's experiences. And much of my research has been dealing with quite difficult topics. So, but on the other, which is not really kind of because the topics are spectacular. They are just very heavy topics, and they are these are realities of post-Bosnia, of many families in Bosnia, many communities, and it's Bosnia is a post-genocide society. So, and talking about post-genocide society is not just a term. You know, as an anthropologist, I go and look and I kind of try to understand what's happening in these communities and how these communities and to what degree have been able to reconstruct and recreate and reimagine themselves in a post-genocide context. So I'll just provide a little bit of context of the findings that I will share with you. Here they come from two discovery projects funded by Australian Research Council, and each of the projects had also a PhD student involved and practicing research that also will bring something to the communities that I've worked with. I tried always to include, elements in my projects that might benefit communities more directly. And this time, I'm glad I was able to secure two PhD stipends, full-time stipends for two PhD students from Bosnia to be involved in these projects. And one of them has already completed his PhD. Is Dr. Hariz Halilovich, many well-known activist from Bosnia. He completed his PhD. He is now not just a survivor of genocide, and he's also a scholar of genocide.
That is fantastic. I had no idea.
Yeah, thank you.
That's fantastic.
But that was, intention was, Hassan, did a great job in completing his thesis. My second PhD student who is still working on her thesis is Amina Halilovich. And while Hassan looked at how families and communities cope with the issue of the missing in Bosnia, Amina is looking at how this has affected diaspora communities. So she has completed her research in St. Louis and in Melbourne, and is due to submit her thesis this year. Hassan, being a pre-war generation, kind of even a few years older than myself, and Amina is actually born after the war. So it's a nice combination of different perspectives and different generations involved in this research. To all of you, I guess it's needless to go through the statistics, but most of the, as Tanya recognized, most kind of the narratives around the war go into statistics, how many people died and so on. But the statistics are still very, very shocking, considering that we are talking about a relatively small population of people at the time, around 4 million people. We see a huge number of displaced, a shocking number of raped women and girls, and almost whole housing fund destroyed. 800,000 homes were destroyed. These are all statistics that kind of represent the Bosnian war. But my research over the last several years has focused on the issue of the missing persons, and missing is quite a misleading term, because these missing actually were people who were killed most brutally, and their bodies hidden in cavities and mass graves, but they are not graves implying some dignified burial. There's dumping grounds used to hide the evidence of crimes, and 34,000 of these people were registered as missing. People were executed, very often taken to the sites where they were summarily executed. And not only in Srebrenica, but this practice actually started in 1992 at places such as Prijedor in northern Bosnia, in eastern Bosnia, and wherever ethnic cleansing, an euphemism for genocide, was conducted. In addition to systematic destruction of human life, also the cultural heritage was targeted, so libraries, museums, even archives and official offices where records were kept. And this was genocide. This was recognized by those who had early access to concentration camps. So it was not just a term that came out, after ICTY judicially confirmed. So the first journalists who managed to visit concentration camp sites in Western Bosnia, such as Ray Gatman, who won a Pulitzer Prize for his book Witness to Genocide, recognized actually this was genocide. It was concentration camp. There were people starving inside. They were tortured. They were killed. They were dehumanized in every way, and also their lives, very often were, not only at risk but taken. Genocide since 1948, the UN Convention on Genocide hasn't changed in terms of what it constitutes, but even the last point on this list was practiced as a genocidal action in Bosnia, in eastern Bosnia, around Visegrad and down in Zvornik. Children were also separated, and years later, some individuals came out as with those stories that they accidentally discovered, and so it is genocide was practiced in its aspect in Bosnia. And this was finally confirmed for the first time in 2001 at the ICTY in the case of Radislav Krstić, and as we know, several times later was confirmed in the judgments against Mladić, Karadzic, and others. But for anthropologists, our understanding and our research involving genocide and how we look at as a kind of practicing methodology called ethnography, which is a very holistic approach. We also look at a holistic approach that genocide applies. And we see that genocide as a cosmological destruction aimed at obliterating everything that makes a community. And of course, this includes physical extermination, but also destruction of culture, destruction of infrastructure, even alteration of nature. And in my work as an anthropologist, as an ethnographer, and of course I'm not the only anthropologist doing this research in Bosnia, but the challenges that anthropologists face is we study with the communities, we study at the sites, through field work, through physical presence and prolonged stay in this local context. But our work in post-genocide Bosnia along the river Drina very much resembles kind of the work of archaeologists. Unlike archaeologists who study dead cultures, anthropologists study living cultures. So for us, our work in a way become archaeological work rather than anthropological, because the ruins left and now overgrown by nature are just evidence of life that existed there. And these sometimes from distance, they look like ancient Roman ruins, but they're very modern homes with balconies and very, very kind of thoughtfully designed houses that can be recognized in the structures, in the monumental structure sometimes, like several floors that would have required a lot of effort and resources, and would take years for a family to build these homes. And unlike in many other countries, including Australia, where homes, dwellings, real estate kind of that pass on from hand to hand, hand to hand, and people sell it as a property. In Bosnia, home is a place of belonging. So home is an identity, and it's not really something for sale. But when people get destroyed, physically eliminated, eradicated, killed, the homes in a way remain, or what is left of this destroyed home, of devastated homes, are kind of monuments to the lives that existed. That's how I see them. That's how I actually ethnographically engage with these ruined homes. And for forensic investigators, it would be easy to actually find evidence of how these homes were destroyed. Across from these homes is Serbia, is the River Drina, is the border. Most of these homes actually were initially directly destroyed from Serbia, and then the perpetrators, after crossing the river, burned them or destroyed them completely. But then this, as an ethnographer, I also come across these sites, and this is almost an idyllic picture of Bosnian rural life with a small yard with veggie patch, and there's also the hay store, which is typical for Bosnia, where the grass is collected during the summer and then kind of kept in that form for colder months. But there's that devastated, destroyed home in front, and the handful of returnees to this place, they have recreated that life, and even repurposed the ruin of the house, now becoming home to a cow that resides there. So it has kind of gained some purpose and become shelter. And these are post-genocide communities, or the fractions of the communities that attempt to reconstruct lives. Of course, mostly men were those who were killed, and so there's hardly any men that we come across when researching post-genocide communities. They are women who lost their sons and husbands and fathers, and most often multiple members of their families. And sadly, there are also less women. Every time I go there are also less of these returnees, because they die, and not at very advanced age, because I guess the life that they had in the last 30 years has been very, very tough. And from this photograph, only one woman is still alive. Talking about my presentation, will be also talking about commemorations and memorializations, and how survivors commemorate and perform their rituals in different domains. But most prevalent and possibly least visible, and especially invisible for people who are not ethnographers, are these commemorations that take place in a very intimate, private domain through prayers. Prayer become not just a submission to God, but it becomes kind of ongoing conversation with those who are missing. So through and talking to some of these women, and they explain how the fantasy they have, how through their prayers the souls of their missing relatives are smiling in heaven, because their prayers kind of contribute to that better feeling in afterlife. Of course, it is a fantasy, but it is the only thing that many of these women have to hang on to. So there's nothing more than their dedication to prayers. Researching post-genocide Bosnia is going to places that are now places of mass graves. And as I said, mass graves are usually also execution sites. And these mass grave sites have kind of made this very sad map of Bosnia that once was known as for diversity, and different colors would represent different percentage of ethnicity that lived in a particular place. But now we can see this pattern of mass graves. Of course, the pattern also indicates that what has become known as Republika Srpska after 1995 are actually places where mass graves are located. And this is also known why. The huge issue of the missing people at the end of the war resulted in creation of International Commission on Missing Persons in 1996, tasked with initially providing sufficient evidence for massacres that took place in Srebrenica in 1995, providing evidence to the court that actually these people were from local people from Srebrenica, who were then put in mass graves. So initial mission was much less ambitious. And it started even before the DNA technology was so advanced that it could match blood samples or DNA from survivors with those from human remains exhumed from mass graves. But then the work in Bosnia, including local scientists in Bosnia, biomedical scientists, expertise has been developed, which now has been used across the globe, and to identify victims through DNA, the survivors, and the process. I've worked also with the scientists to learn about the process. And the biggest challenge was to extract DNA from bones, and then only particular bones would be used, or would have sufficient and undamaged DNA that could be extracted. So all that process has involved a lot of creativity, thinking, and science, and that science has now been available to the rest of the world. And ICMP has become a global organization which has identified victims of both, mostly in conflict-related disappearances, but also in tsunami, for example, in Southeast Asia, and has done missions down in Iraq, in Libya, are now involved in the work in Ukraine, and have moved from Sarajevo, where they had their headquarters and kind of focused on the region. They have moved to The Hague a few years ago. So genocide in Bosnia.
I just wanted to tell you that they are also doing work in Latin America, which is really remarkable, in the Black Triangle, which is where Guatemala, Costa Rica, and all these places are, where there's been, really terrible crimes that have happened historically.
Of course, also more recently,
in this hemisphere, so it's pretty.
And more also refugees who disappear on the borders, and in the sea. So it's a lot of the missingness as a kind of new phenomenon has become a global phenomenon, and this expertise kind of comes directly out of the experience of Bosnian genocide, or the legacy of Bosnian genocide. And I'll try not to have too many graphic photographs, but focusing on culture. That's what I would like to talk. How genocide, and especially the issue of the missing, has changed Bosnian culture, has changed the language, has kind of created new rituals. And all of this, in a way, to people living in Bosnia as well as those outside, has over the years kind of been, they have accepted this as no new language, and without necessarily questioning where does it come from, or because it's been so part of daily lives in many families that they use these terms as ordinary, everyday terms. So when I kind of talk to people down in Bosnia, say if someone from 85 now turned up here, and they're listening to your conversation, wouldn't understand a lot of things. What's a returnee? Returnee, which is a person who survived everything and then managed to get back to the place of origin. So that place didn't exist. From Raseljeno lice, IDP, and the missing, again, especially when translated, it has really even more kind of confusing meaning. Nestali, it's someone evaporated, someone just, it's not there. While families talk about their nestali, about their missing family members, as this is kind of their status rather than a category of genocide victims. Some of the categories have been bureaucratized as well, and they are such as, for example, martyr's family or shahidska porodica, which on the one hand provides moral status to the surviving family, but on the other hand is also stigmatizing because most of these families depend on social security handouts and kind of are kept in that dependency role. So there's a bit of a kind of feeling like subject to charity rather than being honored for being that type of family. There are phrases that are commonly used kind of to also avoid directly naming what happened. And only insiders would be familiar with this language, such as nije prešao, moj sin nije prešao, my son didn't cross. And it really refers to crossing from Srebrenica all the way on the death march to Tuzla. And that has somehow come to become a very commonly accepted phrase and used phrase by the survivors. So when interviewing them, it would be so many nisu prešli, so many didn't cross, and that person, did survive. One of the phenomena that has become part of Bosnian culture is also this postponed mourning, where someone who disappeared, was killed in 95, and kind of many still some 1,000 Srebrenica victims still are to be identified, and kind of the mourning for that person is postponed. But that postponement is not like that doesn't happen, doesn't exist. It's present every day, but there is no kind of final now. There's a burial, and they will finalize the mourning procedure. The terminology that came from forensic scientists such as mass graves, primary mass grave, secondary mass grave, tertiary mass graves, are also terms that mothers of Srebrenica who are not forensic experts who use. That my son's leg was found in a tertiary grave, he was found in that primary grave, so they know. And these are really locations where perpetrators dumped the bodies, and then in attempt to hide them, they had to redo their job and move bodies along the broader area. And so primary, secondary, tertiary graves also become part of biographies of these post biographies of the victims. Exhumație, exhumation, term that hardly anyone used before the war or knew what it meant, so it was a very expert term. And that expert term has found its place into a common language. So exhumacije, survivors go to the places where exhumacije take place, where exhumations are, of mass graves are happening. Morgues of where human remains being kept sometimes for decades, and have increasingly become archives of not just human remains, but also of the belongings, and then where identities get established. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. DNA or DNK acronym is a common term that I remember coming across this term sometime in primary school and not really hearing much about it until I started, went to study medicine. But old grandmothers would talk confidently about DNK, and for them it would have meaning, which is identity, kind of very my blood, my DNK. Mass burials are something new, and I'll talk about this as well. And so this how we talk about morgues as archives. There is one part, this where the literally like a material evidence is kept on a kind of archival storage place, and this one is in Tuzla, and David would know this. Unpacking this bags, you would come across human remains like this, and human remains are very carefully analyzed, and each bone is put in a skeleton if it exists, in order to come with a as much as possible complete skeleton. They are not really bodies any longer. In order to produce a document verifying someone's identity. And this is very important for the survivors to establish the property rights. More recently, a group of families could apply for compensation from Dutch government for those men and boys that they had the place in Potocari on 13th of July 1995, and for them they had to produce document issued by the morgue that the relatives were identified positively, and when they were identified, so that now a correlation between people, mass grave and place and of execution can be, and date of execution can also be established, probably approximately. But through archival work, it is now possible to obtain a document, and these are actually literally then from bags of bones to these parts. The pictures of these coffins or tabuts, as they are called in Bosnia, have become symbol of post-genocide Bosnia. But these are completely new, new design of tabuts. These Muslims do not bury that in coffins, so they are put in a white shroud, and they are just carried on tabut and then put directly in earth in the ground, and so without a coffin. However, not dealing with bodies and dealing with human remains, dealing with bones, it would be impossible actually any other way to bury them. And so there's the compromise between something that's not a coffin, but it's coffin-like. There's still a shroud, and green shroud, unlike originally white shroud, so has become a new funeral rite in Bosnia, and Bosnians and researchers who have done research on post-genocide Bosnia will be familiar with this, and maybe as well. But this is a not really traditional way how Bosnian Muslim get buried. Also, mass burial, something unseen in the history of Bosnian Muslims. So burial, especially according to Islamic rituals, is something very intimate. It's for one person, even when the ritual is directly referring by name to the actual person, and those who bury then are also the witness of that person's life, and they are asked if they would forgive that very particular person. That's kind of the last part of the funeral procession. And now it's many of these collective burials, we had over 100 people buried in one day, so that the whole burial procession had to be changed, had to be in a way to address this particular problem. Also, funerals have become mass events that take whole day and bring people from both diaspora, but also people who are not necessarily directly related to the victims, who come to participate in these events out of solidarity. And this is not limited only to Eastern Bosnia, to Srebrenica. The same mass burials take place in western part of Bosnia, around Prijedor, the 20th of July. Very similar pictures, but even though they have kind of become almost a norm when we talk about mass burials, these mass burials are a new moment in Bosnian history, including the caskets, the green caskets. But had also been changed in terms of religious approach to Islamic burials, is that women have been allowed to participate in burials. Traditionally, only men are at the cemeteries participating in burials, but in some places, and I witnessed that earlier, in some villages around Prijedor, there are hardly any men who are left who could actually take active part. So women are taking part not only in prayers sometimes, but also in other parts which traditionally been reserved for men. So the culture has been altered. But even when burial takes place, it's still not an end. So there's still not closure. The term which has been translated in Bosnian as dokopavanje comes from the term of reassociation, which is a technical term, and in terms it means adding another body part or bone usually to the buried skeleton. So the noun dokopavanje or the verb dokopavati does not exist or did not exist in Bosnian dictionary or in any dictionary of the Slavic languages, but now actually they can be rightly added because it has a meaning where to dokopa is really kind of to had additional burial, and thus additional burial is not limited to one burial because there a person gets buried and there's it's not final kind of because the 2 years, 3 years later families get notified that there is another bone or another set of bones found, and then they get the graves get disturbed, exhumed, and additional bones added. And this is usually done, without a big ceremony. It's almost kind of one of these taboos that exist and are not, is not talked about. Even Hasan Uhanović, my colleague, my former PhD student, had last year was notified that part of his brother's skeleton was found, which is now well over 10 years after he buried his brother. And it's kind of you are burying your brother again. So it is an open-ended process of even funeral. So for many people, that period, which in every culture exists, a period of transition between, or liminal period, that's in between period when someone dies and then that person goes through ritual and mourning and burial, and there's some closure. And in Bosnia, usually it's not only limited to Bosnian Muslims. This is a period of 40 days. That 40 days also is linked to when people get born. Like first 40 days are crucial, and the babies don't go out in the first 40 days. 40 days of mourning and observation of the period that soul departs cannot be really observed because that liminal period, it's become open-ended. And that liminal period also keep people, survivors, in that trapped in that liminality. So that, and this especially relates to Bosnian war widows, women who lost their husbands. Many of them still have not found their husbands and family members, and without having that closure, even legally for them, they could not be regarded as able to move on with their lives. So most Bosnian widows have never remarried and or started new lives. And there are several reasons, including that being trapped in that liminal sphere where there is no really closure. But there are also community expectations, so that if a shehidska porodica, mother who lost son and husband, is kind of remarrying, is like this, honoring the memory of that almost saintly relative she lost. So of course, lack of marriageable men is another. There's the demography is being depleted, so there's no enough men of particular age that would remarry, and many actually even not only married women, but women who were at the marriageable age at the time, who was their boyfriends, for example, they were not able to marry because the generation perished. And I worked with many families where there's auntie of my age who ended up looking after sisters' children, and just there was no no prospect of marrying, and now they are, in their 50s. Commemorations do start at home with home walls kind of memory, and sometimes photographs were destroyed, and sometimes photographs are kind of reconstructed from school photos, from the found sent by someone, extracted from ID documents. But these are photographs that are quite well preserved, and they are in private domain. But more increasingly, the commemorations have been taking place in public domain as well, and not only in Bosnia but also in diaspora, in Melbourne, across the globe, commemorating both Srebrenica on the 11th of July and Prijedor on 31st of June. And there are even embodied memories of children, of young people who were children at the time. Many of them don't remember their lost fathers, and they kind of use elements of popular culture like tattooing, which is haram in Islam, but they do have religious symbols tattooed on their skin with the names of their fathers, dates of their birth, when they were born, when they disappeared. Sometimes they are the whole religious prayers tattooed on their bodies, and it's something that's fascinating to explore as from a ethnographic point of view, because it is very embodied, that it's again new, and the meaning is assigned by the survivors, by the actual walking monuments of the loss. Some of the memories are not coming from the archives, coming from the perpetrators who filmed their participation in killing the civilians, and in particular, a family in Melbourne recognized their father being, they saw it on the news down in Melbourne, how the father was executed. And some of these videos increasingly that get discovered and are used as kind of kept as private and collective memorials. Photographs and material evidence from mass graves, originally used as evidence in the ICTY, and at one point, over I think about close to 1,000 artifacts were destroyed by the ICTY. Since then, families are insisting on keeping the material belongings exhumed from mass graves, and more recently, that has been organized into archival and museum collection in Srebrenica, the Srebrenica Memorial Cemetery, where both material artifacts and also the oral histories of the survivors have been preserved. Sadly, many survivors, many mothers died before they had the opportunity to get their story recorded, and even after they recorded, some passed shortly after that. So it is a kind of urgency to record these stories, and Emil Suljak is our colleague, who is director now at the Memorial Center. Srebrenica has been very, very proactive in getting as many stories recorded as possible. These stories, 100, I think initially 20, but there are going to be more. Of these stories have also become part of the Shoah Foundation repository of oral histories, which is kind of sharing these stories, but also preserving them further. And
how many were recorded already?
Oh, by now they would be they were 500 before, and then they would be, and they keep recording them every day. So just when they edit them and put them online, I think they will be well over maybe 2,000 stories. It's a big project, and a lot of that is still requiring editing and translation and transcribing.
For people who may not know, the Shoah Foundation is in Los Angeles. It's Jewish founded, and
I've actually also introduced Jasmila Sabanich to U.S. Holocaust Museum. And so there's been a number of collaborations, and my friend Amr knows that I really care about this because I am Jewish, and the confessional society of Bosnia, which is Islam and Jews together, there was always cooperation. And so this is a wonderful thing to see that now it's manifested in one of the most prestigious Jewish institutions in the United States. So I just want to say this is really a wonderful project.
And some of that expertise and experience with them recording stories, oral histories, started really in St. Louis with Professor Ben Moore, originally initiating Bosnian Memory Project, which has now grown into a Center for Bosnian Studies. So, and that experience in even protocols that they developed have been very valuable to the people at the Memorial Center Srebrenica. And all of this is really kind of to rehumanize the victims, to individualize their stories, and for this for the mass of victims, and talking in plural about these people, and it's as if they somehow shared one life and one destiny, and one set of desires. It is to get them to personalize them, to rehumanize them, because through genocide they were dehumanized in every regard. It was how they were killed, how their bodies were destroyed, so to disappear, not to exist, to even through collective burials, kind of their humanity still not being reclaimed. So by getting these stories, individualizing them is also rehumanizing them. And I don't know how much time I've got, but I've got the second part of presentation, which I thought I could share, which is dealing with different aspects of culture.
You have time, but
yeah, okay, I'd love to then really address this.
we should.
This is shorter.
Yes. Some time.
Yeah,
Yes.
I've most of the research by not only anthropologists but by us who studied Bosnia has been focused on the victims, survivors, and kind of law is persecuting war criminals, and there's not much research on perpetrators and what happens there. So as an anthropologist interested in cultures, I also wanted to see, actually I couldn't escape but seeing what was happening in the cultural domain and how genocide has affected the culture of the group in whose name genocide was committed, or how the perpetrators have changed their culture after genocide. And I'll share with you some of the findings. Some of them I've written about, and some are still to be described. So Gregory Stanton, a genocide studies scholar, famously developed the stages of genocide. The first one starting with that dehumanization, and the last one being denial. And in the Bosnian context, it's in post-genocide Bosnia, it's not really that denial is so much part of the genocide narrative. It's gone even beyond denial. So there's a literally cultural triumphalism, where genocide is not denied. It didn't, we didn't do it, it didn't happen, but it's celebrated. Yes, we have done it, we'll do it again. And the forms in which this happened is very cultural, kind of happens in the cultural space. So, and of course, doesn't happen spontaneously. It's organized, well organized. A group called the Eastern Alternative, funded by Russia, for many decades now, based in close to Srebrenica in Bratunac, every year has kind of a culture of triumphalism, starting with posters and billboards like this on the 11th of July, placed in Srebrenica, in the town itself, having movies dedicated to Ratko Mladic, the war criminal sentenced for life in prison for his role in genocide. And the landscape in places such as Prijedor, another place of atrocity, huge monuments, exclusive monuments have been built to celebrate again the Army of Republika Srpska and soldiers for their heroism, and Prijedor did not have heroism. Prijedor had concentration camps, genocidal violence, rape camps. It was just a place of there were no heroism. Also around Prijedor in the former concentration campsites, Ternopolje, through which probably 30,000 people went through, and many were killed either there or Krivičanske stijene, removed in central Bosnia, but definitely most of them expelled. So it was part of genocidal campaign to expel people from Prijedor. At that concentration campsite, there is a monument to Serb heroes in a form of Serb exclusive symbol, eagle. And if you look carefully here, you will see flowers. So children, primary school children from these local schools go and lay flowers there every year and there's a day of liberation of Prijedor, which is day of actually occupation of the town in 1992. So the whole kind of commemorative praxis, if you like, has been completely changed. Even the land, the private land, has been occupied and used for marking the territory, if you like, and it took years for the woman Grandma Fata to get the church removed, and David would know her very well. It went up to the EU court. Graffitis are not celebrating popular kind of icons, popular culture, but war criminals. At the places, this is in Foča, in Partizan Hall, another site of atrocities and suffering of Bosnian Muslims, Bosniaks in 1992, and that place was reconstructed by, I think, EU, or there's a plague, or OSCE. There's a mural, brand new mural on the wall with Hariz Halilovich. It is, more than no kind of known symbol of war crimes. That is in Second World War that inspired those war crimes in this war. Almost every town in Republika Srpska would have graffitis that would call for killings of Muslims, most often being called Turks, kind of dehumanized. And this is not kind of done by some anonymous groups who hide. The slogan "Nož, žica, Srebrenica," which literally means knife via Srebrenica, knife, symbol of slaughter, of killing via the hands. Via was used to tie hands of victims in Srebrenica. This slogan has been has accompanied every soccer or football match in Serbia, and not only in Serbia, also beyond Serbia. Something that has been sanctioned as kind of been part of popular culture. Some media outlets in Serbia have also exclusively kind of basing their popularity on mocking genocide victims, making jokes about victims who were buried, or even jokes about raped women in Bosnia. And this one is TV happy with Milomir Maric, the journalist who regularly brings war criminals, even enabled Ratko Mladic, who is in prison at the time, The Hague still, who called live in the program. So it is very much kind of a genocide entertainment industry that has been flourishing in Serbia as part of post-genocide culture. Mothers would take selfies in Chetnik uniforms, memorabilia with knives, and post them, and it's not kind of, they're not pirates. These Chetnik insignia on the poster behind on the wall, you can see those war criminals that appear on murals, like Hariz Halilovich. Even and what's kind of, to an ethnographer, what's very confronting is that this is, even the popular culture has very much embraced that trend, so that weddings, birthday parties, christening of children, any kind of any event that involves celebration includes songs, singing of songs that mock Srebrenica and even call for Srebrenica to be repeated, or they use catchy rhymes to kind of call for genocide like Srebrenica to be repeated in other places like Sjenica, and Sjenica is a Bosnian, is a Muslim dominated place in Serbia, or Pazar, which rhymes in Vukovar, and we know what happened in Vukovar in 1991 in Croatia. So this is happening now, and it happens at private parties, at a reception, and with people dressed nicely and celebrating something that's very important to them. At this same celebration, the songs mocking Bosnian Muslim women that were raped and very often killed are also performed. You know, this one calling Fatima, asking where her skirt is, and it's across Chetnik's chest. So all this remains, as I said, flourishing culture of triumphalism within the Serbian population, and remains also unchallenged in terms of sanctioning it through law. And it's not just that crazy stuff that happens down there in the Balkans is limited to the Balkans. There's been internationalization of this culture, with initially Radovan Karadzic receiving awards from Greece and Russia, of course. But that this ideology and this culture of triumphalism has also inspired some of the white supremacist terrorist acts, including both the Breivik's terrorist attack in Norway and more recent massacre in New Zealand. The perpetrators, especially the last one, the one in New Zealand, even listened to a very crude nationalist song from wartime Bosnia, and singing about slaughter of Turks, of Muslims, and how Karadzic will conquer the country, and that has become an unofficial anthem of white supremacists. Now song called "Remove Kebab," but actually it's Serbia Strong, originally translated. As I said, it's very crude. And probably, most likely, the perpetrators wouldn't understand, any words, but it has become a symbol, like of a new wave of Islamophobia, and all these references to Turks, to Muslims being killed, is something that white supremacists have, integrated in their high culture. Not only this, white supremacists who hide and then suddenly commit the massacre. Not only that they are celebrating in high culture. Peter Handke won Nobel Prize for Literature in 2019, called him the first ethnographer of Srebrenica, post-genocide Srebrenica, because he was the first who was physically present. This picture was taken shortly after Srebrenica genocide. But he was not there to look for the missing, for the mass graves, what happened, but he was there to actually celebrate with, his, those he found as somehow appealing to him, Serb nationalists. So while concluding, maybe just talking about unresolved past, that's all kind of talking about unresolved past, and past that somehow it's left in the 90s. It's really, in my research, I come across unresolved present. That past hasn't been kind of a closed chapter, which now it just remains unresolved. It's unresolved present. That present remains unresolved because of the past that has it continues to exist, and in some ways also kind of to find ways to come, to get refreshed, to get re-energized, so that even new generation is now completely approaching generation of both victims and perpetrators, expressing their connection to genocide through in an embodied way, either through singing and dancing or through tattooing the names of their fathers. So thank you very much for your patience, and I apologize if it was a bit too much content. I would be very happy to.
No apologies necessary. What we're going to do is We're gonna open it up to questions and comments. And when you would like to ask a question, please identify yourself. And provide your affiliation, like your student human or somewhere else. So thank you so very much. That's really tough material, very difficult. And I have to say that having witnessed Srebrenica a number of times, it's never, ever easy to go and to witness. It's very, very emotional. And so for you, Hariz, to work directly as an anthropologist with people, you really do understand. And one of the comments that I have right now, because a number of us have been very upset about US foreign policy and what's going on in the Balkans. But one of my conclusions about that today in conversation with some people in Sarajevo was that the people have suffered so much. There was so much death and so much trauma, and it continues into this moment. And this is something that the diplomats don't think about. That's why your work is so important.
Thank you, Tanya. I hope that.
Yes, indeed. So I'd like to open it up. And I'd like to see some Harriman students ask some questions, because that's part of my job as a professor here. So, yes.
Yeah, thank you for
Identify yourself.
Oh, yeah. My name is Harriman Institute. I'm actually originally from Bosnia. I grew up next to Ahmići, so Ahmići was like my first memory as a kid growing up. This is my second year at Harriman, just like my last semester. And so like growing up there, witnessing the war, I was like, we'll never see this again in Europe, right? And then of course, last February, March rolls around and we're seeing same thing repeat itself, right? Like if you look at Ukraine, what's happening? Same thing repeating itself, like never even thought that would happen, particularly in Europe. Like we set up the genocide after the Holocaust, we learn our lesson. Of course, the whole Bosnia happens, and now Ukraine is happening. So, in short, my question is: what are some lessons that the Ukrainians can take from the genocide that happened in Bosnia as they're discovering mass graves, both, as Russia withdrew back in Bucha, and I believe, unfortunately, that they'll discover a lot more. Like, as an anthropologist, what are some lessons that they could take from your study and what you have witnessed?
Thank you very much, Erwin. The purpose of genocide studies, which my study, my research falls into as well, is really, well, it's not so much to document, that's the historians do that, but it's also to kind of exactly identify patterns that can be applied to different scenario, to identify kind of to have early warning system that might point to genocide happening. And in terms of what came out of Bosnian genocide, I think there are a lot of lessons that I think the Ukrainian government has and international organizations, international community have already kind of applied. So when perpetrators killed thousands of people, the only, even back then there was the US satellite spying satellites took some pictures of places where people were killed, but it took 24 hours to see it, and there was no actually footage of people being executed. Might have existed but never became public. But the places where ground was disturbed, so there was pictures. These satellite pictures helped, but today we have much more sophisticated technology, and the missing, in the category of the missing, which in the previous wars people got killed, and missing, presumably killed, remain some unresolved or just left unaddressed. So since the Bosnian war, the missing people are searched for, and not just through looking for mass graves, but really looking to identify the victims. So so the perpetrators will now know that they can't hide people unless it probably burn them or do something, which they might do well, and they did in Bosnia as well. Not every victim will be identified. Bosnian Memorial Center has offered assistance to Ukrainian government. There will be mothers who lost their sons, so there will be solidarity with and they are like those groups that Tanya mentioned in Latin America. If you see the pictures, they look the same. You could really kind of the mothers who lost their sons and they are searching for the truth. They somehow end up looking the same, even physically. So I think that experience of solidarity, but also practical assistance, but how to deal with the missing, how to importance of all sort of records that need to be kept. So in Bosnia, everything was burned, so there were no dental records, there were no ID documents. Like the perpetrators would just destroy everything. So very often the evidence of someone's existence had to be kind of created ad hoc through witnesses and so on, while that creates a mess that's not really easy to rectify later. Many people end up having problems because they reported a person being killed years later in a different place from the place where they were killed, and then that created bureaucratic problems. But I'm more optimistic with Ukraine. So Ukraine does not have an arms embargo. They are, as we discussed earlier, even the Americans are adding, increasing their production to supply them with some ammunition. So Bosnia had an arms embargo. It did not even have its own army when the war started. It was completely occupied from inside outside. And the genocide that we are talking about happened in the UN safe area, the first ever such. So it was UN presence, physical presence was there. And that's why the Dutch government is taking partial responsibility for at least some of the people who were killed there, because they failed to protect them. So there won't be, and it's not only that Ukraine is learning from Bosnia, also Kosovo is learning from Bosnia. So there won't be a peace agreement that would create some sort of Republika Srpska in Kosovo, because it will create what we've got now, this functional state where kind of conflict is not even frozen, like everything is being groomed. The people are being groomed, young generations are being groomed to hate and kind of to end up in conflict again. So having had a different solution in 1995 would have made that country much more stable than it is now. I think Ukraine is doing better than Bosnia.
I will say this from a judicial standpoint, there is a paucity of international courts that can take this on. And I'm actually pursuing, that's my work right now, on conflict-related sexual violence. And there are now about 7 states, including Germany, that are going to prosecute crimes that have taken place in Ukraine. But the ICC cannot prosecute aggression. So that court is not really going to be doing much work on this war, which is really regrettable. But what they're saying now is that European states are going to take on these cases and they're going to prosecute them. The United States has not volunteered to do so, by the way, yet. So we shall see about that. Next question, yes.
I lived in Ukraine for several years before starting my master's. I studied Ukraine. And I was really, seeing through celebration of the triumphalism of genocide, realizing that, for those of us who focus on Ukraine, I think we have this dream that Russia will collapse and Russian society will kind of have this revolution where they'll all collectively apologize for everything. And that's not going to happen. There's going to be similar kind of celebrations of what is going on now in Russia, I'm sure, among certain parts of the population. Fortunately. But I was thinking about this kind of idea of genocide, the genocide denial, but then there seems to also be a lot of genocide gatekeeping, where we say like, that doesn't count as genocide, or that's, there's kind of this debate constantly over what exactly constitutes genocide. And there are legal definitions, yes, but why, in your view, do some people kind of have the urge to step in and classify certain things as not genocide or genocide? When we clearly see in certain cases that there's genocidal intent, and there's destroying schools and museums, and just killing people just because who they are is genocide, right? But there's still a lot of argument.
It's been thank you very much, Lily, and it's been a lot of kind of almost genocide receiving becoming a very special category, and kind of anything beyond genocide is not bad enough. And genocide is a recent term, so it's in 48 it was ratified the Genocide Convention, and even back at the time it was very contested because the concept of crimes against humanity, which is to me sounds much more powerful. Humanity is the wholeness of totality of humankind. So crimes against humanity, and the main difference then came to genocide refers to killing individuals and members of a social group, while crimes against humanity is just killing individuals, killing people. So it's not really, people get killed anyway. And if you kill, I don't know, whatever number of people just for some reason, but not to kill them because they are member of that particular group, racial, ethnic, political, then somehow that killing is different. But the killing in itself can be, in terms of number of people killed, or brutality with which they were killed can be worse. So it's not, and I don't really think that somehow genocide should remain the only category that we should worry about. So crimes against humanity, but it has become, so if it's not genocide, it's somehow acceptable. Crimes against humanity is huge, and
yes, it's an atrocity. It's an atrocity crime. Crimes against humanity is atrocity crime. These are egregious crimes. So you're absolutely right. There's a lot of people who were killed in Bosnia through crimes against humanity, and they did not rise to the level of genocide. But yet they were killed because they were a specific group, or over 1,000 mosques were pulled up from their foundation and destroyed in Bosnia. That was cultural genocide, as an example. But you're absolutely right.
But the perpetrators also somehow like being found guilty of crimes against humanity, somehow like, it's not genocide. It's not really
Right.
a less evil category to be, found guilty of.
Other questions?
My name's Jason Cedar. I'm a first year Harriman student. I spent some time in Sarajevo. What is the Serbian government's official stance on Srebrenica? Is it recognized? Is it not? Has that stance changed since the 90s? And how does that differ from the Republika Srpska's stance?
It does not differ much. Well, current Serbian government is, you would be probably familiar. The current president is come from the far right kind of political spectrum. During the war, was physically present in Bosnia. There are photographs and videos of him carrying a weapon accompanying Vojislav Šešelj, who is sentenced for criminal. But publicly calling in parliament, and it's also a record for killing of 100 Muslims for one Serb. So he's a long-term proven nationalist, hater, war kind of person who is linked to this.
And also darling of the West, sorry for.
Yes, he is.
Sadly, yes,
He is
sadly he
darling
became that.
of the-
So what kind of was regarded as extremism shortly after the war has really become mainstream, and also thanks to kind of recognizing people like Vučić, current president of Serbia, as somehow a democratically elected leader who is progressive. She's a radical, political radical, and Serbia has always done the minimum for whatever they ask. So they would be maximum they accepted is tragic, a tragedy, tragic crime in Srebrenica, about which we don't know much, but not genocide. Even Srebrenica, which was ICTY proven, every piece of evidence, and there are millions of pieces of evidence were tested in court, with defense having right to question and to dispute, and then it was really like every piece of evidence is 100% waterproof, but still even not accepting what happened in Srebrenica, not to say for anything else. Vučić controls and owns most of media in Serbia, and that media is much worse than we had before the war, for example. So that it's mocking the victims, inciting violence, scaring their own people. How Croats will do something, Muslims are doing this, and that media kind of creates or keeps Serbs in a state of confusion, if they at least, or in a really participating willingly in this triumphalism. Like, yes, we did it, and we'll do that. So Republika Srpska at one stage, and of course that's thanks to international presence there. Late BiH was a high representative in Bosnia, ordered, instructed Serbian government of Republika Srpska to do their own investigation, and produce a report, on Srebrenica. It was Srebrenica Commission funded by Republika Srpska, and at the time, a president of Republika Srpska recognized genocide. They came up with lists of 20,000 individuals participating in various roles, or linked to Srebrenica genocide. So they produced evidence; they had it. But since then, there's been kind of complete move in opposite direction with current president of Republika Srpska, Milorad Dodik, who also publicly recognized genocide several years ago. Now is a staunch kind of denier and hater of any kind of ideas of living together, sharing power, political power, cultural space. So it's actually effectively working at the solution of Bosnia, and he doesn't hide it.
Anyone else? Yes.
A second-year RMIT student as well.
This is good.
Inscription and really interesting, and then sort of beyond how societies like in this kind of situation make the transition from denialism to triumphalism, if there is a transition at all in how that is.
Yeah, thank you, Rachel. It is really valid comment and a way to think about. So denial could have come from lack of knowledge, from also psychological kind of defense. You refuse to acknowledge something because you need to confront it. So, but what happened in Bosnia is that shortly after the war, there were mass graves still fresh there, but people were not so. There was no celebration, so people, perpetrators they're hiding, denying a little bit. They did a lot of perpetrators actually on run as well. So, but there was no, instead of going to catharsis, the evidence through ICTY court, for example, all the material that was the court procedures that were public on TV, all that failed, and it failed probably for several reasons. So one of them is that it took years, sometimes decades, for some of these main war criminals to be persecuted and found guilty. The procedures, the court procedures took place in a distant country, in the Netherlands, not in Bosnia. So local people saw it somehow. They didn't need to watch it. So it was not like something happening in Sarajevo or in Belgrade or in Srebrenica itself. The media would create kind of momentum for people to be interested in what's happening. So it was somehow became just something that happens, a story. And ordinary people were not asked, or were not asked to be confronted with these facts. Also, the whole idea, of course, of individual responsibility, that's how it is. So you don't jail a family if a member of a family committed a crime. But if if a state, and genocide is a state crime, the state is an institution, involves kind of a lot of people, and if institutions were not sanctioned, then the individual responsibility really didn't mean much. So some of these war criminals came back as heroes. They were welcomed as heroes because I did it for you guys. They jailed me. Now I'm free, and there was no, it was not Nuremberg. So it was these people would serve 2/3 of their or their sentence, and then they would be free. And so it was not. Judicial process should have been the main kind of instrument to confront denial or provide evidence. So this evidence, Allies took German civilians to mass graves and to concentration camps to show them, okay, you can't deny this. So you have these mass graves in Bosnia, you still have them. You have morgues in Tuzla, and I bring my students from Australia to study that, and then David gets involved too with this type of educational projects. But in Bosnia, there is not really that, the Serb children would be involved in anything that's kind of leading to some catharsis. So I think if unaddressed, if denial can be addressed, but if it remains left unaddressed, then triumphalism becomes, it's just that the perpetrators kind of, and that wouldn't be the first time that, through mocking the victims, you kind of also glorify what you achieved, but turn it into folklore rather than, war crime.
David.
Well, thanks. I want to thank Hariz and Tanya for arranging the program. Hariz for his talk, and I was just thinking of three very quick comments. That if you found something that responds to, that would be great. But one was the in terms of the question of missing persons. My son and I were invited to visit the cemetery in Visoko in November because they have a morgue in Visoko where hundreds of people, hundreds of victims are kept who haven't been identified. So they're in this tragic, really a tragic limbo. Each one is a case. Each one has a prosecutor assigned to it. But in none of the cases is there enough of a DNA match. So they're unidentified. I'm not sure exactly what the abbreviation means on the it's the NN.
And
So there are so many, they overflow the morgue, so they started to bury them in the cemetery, but they have no funding for this. So they invited us to come in to try to start working with them to find some funding to provide the burials, but they're still families. These are, you know, people who are human beings who have families whose loved ones who haven't been identified yet. So some families are, you know, kind of refusing this idea that they would be buried in a grave for the what do you call it, the unknown victim. So that was something that was very sad that we found. The Visoko is well known because it's the place where the Srebrenica victims are prepared for burial before they go to the cemetery. But I didn't know about this large number of unidentified people. The other comment I was going to make was because of the interest in triumphalism, there was this kind of apotheosis, is that how you say that word? Of triumphalism recently when Republika Srpska celebrated its creation. And they held a military parade essentially in East Sarajevo with, you know, highly militarized police units and with the kind of nationalist chants, and also it gave an award to Vladimir Putin, the Order of Republika Srpska. So this was really traumatizing for people, and because this was just at the gates of Sarajevo, essentially, from the just down from the hill from which the city was attacked. And my other comment was that we're talking about what Russia could learn from Bosnia. Well, Ukraine could learn from Bosnia, but what I was thinking is that in a sense, Bosnia is also learning from Ukraine in the sense that, if I have this straight, that what's driving much of the aggression in the Ukraine is this idea of a Russian world, the Ruski Mir,
Right.
that has some kind of imperialist design, and today the idea of the Serbian world is very active in the region, and there's also idea of a Croatian world. There was a memorandum from the Croatian Academy of Sciences and Arts only in May of 2022, in which it was reminiscent of the Sonu memorandum, because it was saying that all Croatians in Bosnia and Serbia and Montenegro are all being persecuted, and in order to resolve this, we need to establish a third entity in Bosnia, and have legitimate Croat representation. So this sort of this specter of a Russian world has its echoes in the Serbian world and Croatian world that I think mean trouble for Bosnia in a sense. But that was my thought about Armenians, but I don't know what to do to help the situation in the more than Mexico.
Thank you, David, for the comments. Yeah, no, I agree with everything said. So and it's while focusing on Srebrenica and also referring to Prijedor is really just tackling two, and even in terms of numbers, this would be the 1955 number of victims is down to 8,372, and Prijedor just 3,000. So it's 100,000 people got killed, and a lot of these people were killed across the country. So not every victim goes through will have that much attention and resources dedicated to finding them, and the resources are limited. And of course also because now ICMP has delegated this tracing services identification process down to Bosnian institution MPI, Missing Persons Institute, which is now at the level of Bosnia and Herzegovina. But the budget for the work gets blocked constantly by Republika Srpska. So that when I go in summer to Tuzla morgue, it's a very, very heavy experience, and also in terms of rotting human flesh that's not in air conditioning freezers. It is just in a storage, and it's another kind of form of dehumanization, that the dignity of the victims continues to be kind of disrespected. And it's instrumental, it's not like some coincidence, it is instrumental in terms of Republika Srpska being part of that. So, and that's why while victims remain unidentified and unburied, and they are, human remains across the country.
Yes, please.
First of all, thank you for coming to see us in New York.
Thank you, Amber. Good to
Such a
see you.
long
Thank you.
trip, and for this incredible presentation and the work that you're doing. We're all here because we believe education matters, and it's critical in terms of prevention of the future genocides. Do you think that there is appetite or interest within Australia in particular to integrate some of this work on Bosnian genocide within classrooms, particularly K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade, because those are the generations that will be future policymakers if anything were to happen in the Balkans again. In the US, for instance, in 27 states, there's a requirement to educate about genocide, and much of that education has been on Holocaust. And many of us collectively, including Tanya, has been doing an amazing job in raising awareness around Bosnian genocide. But I don't think that prevention can truly happen until we get into the classrooms and we talk to 5th graders and 8th graders and 12th graders. Is that possible in Australia?
Yeah. Thank you very much. And I know it, I'm impressed what exists actually in both Canada and in the United States in terms of learning about genocide at that level. So in Australia, studying Bosnian genocide has been very much part of Holocaust and genocide studies. All these institutions such as Jewish Holocaust Center, Holocaust Museum in Melbourne, for example, they have sections dedicated to Bosnia. So they are then very often they invite speakers, and some of the MPs linked to Holocaust that had Holocaust background, or their family perished in the Holocaust. Were instrumental in getting Bosnian genocide resolution in Australia into the parliament. So there's been a lot of collaboration. In terms of organized education on genocide, it does not exist in Australia in a kind of not as mainstream, but there are different initiatives, and one of them is called Courage to Care, aiming at high school students. And it's an NGO that creates educational programs and exhibitions where they talk about Holocaust and genocide, including Bosnian genocide, kind of to encourage people, young people, to think what dehumanization might result in, and how caring about others and preventing anything that's kind of any form of discrimination to apply this in their real lives. But we do not have genocide education at undergrad, before graduate, before undergrad actually, for universities.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. It's rather to salute to Dr. Halilovich, to tell you thank you really, and as Dr. Shabi said, for coming so long trip and to give us this lecture. And I know he was in St. Louis, but rather to continue on the David's point, it's a more quick comment. I would say, I think that there is, beside that education that recently was mentioned even by the Secretary General of the United Nations, Guterres, that we have to start as early as the kindergarten and first, second graders. So I said it's a continuous lack of political will and political action. And once you are a journalist at the United Nations for the 30 years, you'll see kind of very strong words, like after the report on Srebrenica that was That was in 1999, I believe. Yeah, it was in 1999 during the Kofi Annan. But then they also developed a very special action, I'm calling a responsibility to protect. That it's really never happened. Nothing has happened.
That's
And
true.
we see that in Ukraine and everywhere.
That's true.
And so I think also, David, that's one of the solutions really is thanks to the activists and scientists like you to move forward and to see whether it will be possible to have that kind of political will and political action regarding memorialization of the Srebrenica genocide and war crimes against humanity in Bosnia, to move with that resolution at the General Assembly. And that would be my advice to new ambassador, because we are going to have a changes of guard now that we are going to have a new ambassador at the UN.
Read a resolution.
Into Belgium,
Yes,
I heard.
resolution
And
on
you went
seven.
to Belgium, I heard as well.
Let's see. Thank you. But I'm talking, this is very important place, I mean, United Nations. If we are going to be able to succeed with that and have that resolution pass, and again, thanks to you guys, I mean, scientists and activists all the time. I mean, we should create some kind of pressure. What do you think about this, actually? Are we going to be able to use all diplomatic tools, all the political will and pressure to move forward and to have something like that?
I think that there's been a bit of kind of decline in or fatigue in kind of the activism and attention. There was a period, where especially through existence of diaspora and lobbying through the local MPs, many countries and states within the countries adopted the Srebrenica resolution on genocide. From started in the United States, from state to state, and then went to the EU, issued their resolution on Srebrenica. Australia issued very comprehensive in 2011 resolution on Srebrenica genocide, calling 11th of July Srebrenica Remembrance Day. But apart from that symbolism that somewhere recorded, hasn't really had any impact. So it's not even, like it was not introduced in curriculum at schools. There would be a lesson at grade 7 dedicated to Srebrenica. If it's already recognized by Australia, by Parliament, for example, or by the EU. So it would be good to see what to have next, but something that has an impact that is used to also as a policy, and also as a kind of a platform for policy that will be that will sanction hate speech, which Milorad Dodik constantly promotes. So that based on that, will recognize, like, what does it oblige these countries to do something when they issue a resolution? Is it just a symbolic statement, or they say, yeah, well, we'll do everything that this is respected, that the memory of genocide is not desecrated in any form, or so that would be, and I don't know, that's kind of more political, systems that operate.
And then we have that as a conclusion, of course, justice delayed, justice denied, all the time.
Yeah.
Lacking of that. That's why I have some hope with that kind of moving toward that resolution in General Assembly of the United Nations, although it's not binding resolution like the Security Council, but still it's kind of.
But I would say when it comes to compensation, that's the thing. Once the perpetrators have to pay, they will think twice if they're gonna do the same thing next time. And there hasn't been, that's kind of bizarre that the Dutch government, Dutch soldiers, of course they did not perform their roles, but and then the only compensation that victims like it, there's now even hierarchy of the victimhood. Again, those usually elderly men and boys who went to the UN compound in Potocari and were their family now can prove that they actually were there and that the proof comes from mass grave and morgue, they get compensated, symbolically, up to 10,000 euros per the first grade of relations. While those who were killed, who got captured and killed without any connection with the UN don't get anything. So, and really the perpetrators should pay, any debt for any damages, and they are not just damages for loss of life. They are damages, you've seen that the landscape I showed, each of these houses, has a value. No one has done kind of the proper research to see how much housing was destroyed in each particular specific place, how much land was there, what was the average, income from the land in the last, 5 years before the war, to use it as a measurement to have that figure, because the lawyers, in the US, they would, insurance, they would instantly come up with a figure. And Serbia has been let off the hook for everything, for killing people, for army, paying perpetrators, hiding, housing them even now, paying for their, it hasn't paid for anything. That should be not just to compensate victims, but it should be punitive. It should be like,
There is, and we're gonna have to end, but I just want to say that I worked with the New Lines Institute on the Ukraine report about the Russian Federation violations of the Genocide Convention, and New Lines has been working around the world. They've been briefing the report. They briefed it immediately. And there is a new compensation approach on Russia with respect to Ukraine, and that compensation there's agreement among most of the Western countries on this, that the money will be taken from Putin and all the oligarchs and all the money that they have stolen, and that money will be used to compensate Ukraine. There is an agreement that has come forward, and there's a consensus on it. No, it's happening, and I just want to say that, first of all, thank you. It's wonderful to see you. You're an anthropologist, thank God. And I want to thank our audience and the participation of the students. Some got out of it, but I'll come back to you about that later. And we want to wish you the best in your continuing tour. And thank you very much, Hariz, for everything you do.
Thank you, Tanya. Thank you. I really can say the same. Thank you. And thank you.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Ime Nikola, evo, kako ste? Dobro, hvala. Dobrodošli. Je, da vas